Hi, and welcome to the newest episode of Preserving History and Democracy. My name is Amanda López Askin, and I am very proud to serve as the Doña Ana County Clerk.
And I'm Caroline Zamora. I'm the Chief Deputy County Clerk.
Okay, so today we're discussing something that is actually one of my favorite topics. It is the ranking and some data that was released by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, otherwise known as MIT. As you're probably aware, MIT is a pretty prestigious academic institution, and so we're really proud to be able to talk about how New Mexico is involved and what MIT has ranked. And it is called the Election and Data Lab, and that's actually what they have at MIT, and it ranks elections across the country using different measures. And we're going to talk about what some of those are, and we're also going to talk about policy and how New Mexico ranked number one in the nation.
So we're really excited about these results. Amanda has been talking about these results for years. We used to be ranked ninth, but now we're ranked first in the nation, and it's pretty impressive. So like Amanda said, we're going to be going through some of these indicators, and we're just really excited about this. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in.
Right. And I think I want to talk about when I first started as clerk in 2018. Some of you may know this, some of you may not, so you will. I was appointed as the clerk for 2 years, and the previous clerk left, resigned, was thrilled to be able to serve in the position, was appointed by the commission at the time. I served for 2 years and was elected in 20. So my job when I first started, as far as I was concerned, was to find out as much as I could about elections, because it is beyond being a steep learning curve. It's very rare that you find somebody who has a long history of working elections and knows all the details, right? So I would often get the question like, oh, I didn't know you had a background in elections. And I said, well, it's actually very rare that you'll find a lot of retired county clerks, but I'm a strong voter and I am excited. And so one of the first things I did was use our very trusty Google machine. And when I used our trusty Google machine, I found some great resources. One of them is actually the Brennan Center for Justice. I really like that it talks a lot about history of voting rights, as well as some of the misinformation about election fraud. But also MIT, this study. And what it has is an election performance index. And so it ranks states in terms of best practices, policy, and indicators and how they're doing on each of them. And these are things that we should be doing, or frankly should not be doing, just depending on where we rank in that. So as I looked at it, imagine my surprise when I discovered that New Mexico was in the top 10. We were ranked number 9. And I had some people at the time tell me, I think we're actually in the top 5. So then we moved down in our rankings, or up, depending. But this past time that the data was released, so imagine
So in 2018, we were ranked 9.
So in 2018, we were ranked 9 heading into 2020.
And then 2020 is when we went to...
Well, we went to, I believe, 24.
Okay.
But I looked into why, and some of the things were very specific. It was the calculation of how and what some of the auditing was in terms of the numbers, right? So you always want a statistically significant number when you're auditing and be able to, and so I think there was just a difference there. And, I really couldn't track down an absolute, but before, I knew there was another one coming out, and I knew we had a lot of great pro-voter endeavors last year connected to the legislature. And so imagine after this MIT study that I discussed pretty much every presentation, right?
Yep.
That I get the call from our very amazing Secretary of State that we are number 1. When I tell you I was floored, I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
I was floored, but I wasn't surprised in its own way, because I knew what a great job the clerks across the state do.
Yeah, but also I know a lot of times New Mexico is never first, and we've talked about this in presentations where that joke of thank God for Mississippi,
I know,
that really is a joke it's a joke for New Mexico, because we're barely above Mississippi. We're always usually last, whether it's like child well-being, child welfare, hunger, things like that. New Mexico does not fare well in a lot of things that are good for our people. But when you hear we do elections really well, so well that we're ranked number 1 in the nation, It's pretty dang good.
Right. And we talk about New Mexico and like some of the challenges we have and leaders currently that are trying to create like long-term systemic change. We know that long-term systemic change happens after a certain amount of time. I'm hoping a lot of the endeavors that have been, all the efforts that have been, the legislative that have been implemented, that we will see the fruits of those labors and we move up in all of the rankings, right? But what we do know today is that we are ranked number one in election administration, and we're exceptionally proud of it, especially under the backdrop of so much misinformation about elections in general. And that is a barrier. You know, when people who may have not historically participated in elections, and when they hear about this ranking, MIT does not have any political investment in New Mexico. MIT is a data-driven, very science-focused academic institution. It doesn't matter to them who is first or who is last. All that matters is the data and the indicators and what that equals. And what that equals is that New Mexico is ranked number one in election administration.
Yeah, and you mentioned the misinformation. We've talked about also the malinformation out there, because misinformation is, okay, I didn't know, I just got it wrong, just because I didn't know. But malinformation is the actual intent of putting out wrong information.
Right, and that is probably pretty rare, I would hope, but we know that it does happen, and that sometimes there are individuals or groups of people that believe if you give bad information, it will discourage participation from our communities. So if you say, this is what they do, and this is how they know who you vote for, this is how it's not effective, etc., unfortunately, it catches on to some people, especially when people know that that's not true. Like the people giving the information know that it's not true, and they're trying to affect, people's belief in voting. It's exceptionally unfortunate, damaging, and it's important that we call it out every time we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk to you about, before we get into the indicators, why do you think we jumped up to number one? I know one of the big things is probably the Voting Rights Act that I know you want to talk about.
Yeah, so last year I had a great time, but it was very difficult. I was in Santa Fe quite a bit. Yep. I was there and committed to being there as often as I could, because we had a very important, some people call it an omnibus bill, which is like this, huge kind of, and it really was. There was a lot of endeavors in there. I keep saying the word endeavors. There was a lot of items in there. They are endeavors. There was a lot of things in there that we've wanted for many, many years. And I say we, I don't mean everybody, but I mean the majority of people. And the legislators that were pushing it forward were really invested in it. And so the Voting Rights Act, the VRA, last year was something that was exceptionally hard fought. And when it was basically voted in, I was thrilled. Those include things like a permanent absentee list, right? That's kind of something simple that most people can relate to. If you want to vote absentee and you want to, or vote by mail, and you want to do that basically the rest of your life, you have to sign up. There's very specific requirements and there's conditions in which you must follow, but you're able to do that, right? You don't have to apply every single election. That in itself, you can see how that decreases a barrier.
Absolutely. And it used to be where you would have to request your mail-in or absentee ballot every election,
right?
Which is, you have to remember the dates. You have to remember a lot of things. It was very cumbersome for a lot of people.
Well, yeah.
And now with the Voting Rights Act, that's been eliminated. So you can just get on this list once. And again, you have to qualify and things like that.
Yeah,
but
there are
it's
things like,
thing.
It's you can't necessarily be sending your ballot every time to if you live somewhere else other than New Mexico or your current address, you can't vote in person. Is something that we have layers upon layers to make sure that it's being utilized as it should be, right? So there is that. And we had things like we restored voting rights for the formerly incarcerated, otherwise known as felons. And that is something that I was supportive of. When I first started as clerk, I kind of was a little on the fence, and I don't even really know why. It just sounded very punitive, and I just felt like, but that's really not who we are, I think, as New Mexicans. I think anytime you can engage somebody who has felt not part of a community or has even behaved as if they were not part of a community, They want to engage again. They want to be at the table. They want to participate. I think it is helpful, not just for that individual, but I believe for our society as a whole, to make space for them in order for them to assist in making decisions for our community, and that includes voting. I always tell the story of a man who was crying as he was leaving a voting location, and when his cousin asked him, "Why are you crying?" he said, "This was the last thing." And it was somebody who had been incarcerated, had struggled with drug addiction, but was kind of on the straight and narrow, was very motivated by the birth of a child, and was doing really well. But he wanted to vote, and it had been 10 years. So I think about those stories. So, yeah.
And I always think I'm very pro people having the rights to be Americans and have a good existence here in our country. And so when I think of like people who were against formerly incarcerated getting their rights to vote, I think they've done everything that they were supposed to do, right? Like they committed a crime, they went to prison, they served the time, they have in many ways rehabilitated themselves in their lives. And why would you want to take any more rights from them?
Well, I will tell you, and I'll be perfectly frank. When I first started, I'll never forget, there was a woman in another part of the state when this came up, because this is that specific legislative change has been up off and on for many, many years, but it just had been voted down again and again. And there was a woman whose daughter was a victim of a crime, and she was very moving. And she said, I believe her daughter was, unfortunately, was murdered or passed. It was very traumatic. I don't remember the details, but I remember her saying something to the effect of, "How is it fair that that person gets to vote, but my daughter is dead?" So when I talk about, I really had to think about it, and I really had to hear those folks and understand as best as I could their pain. I did that. But I also know that I'm not a punitive person overall. That woman has every right to feel how she feels. I really believe that if that person, though, is in society, if that person has been released, and they already are among us, it can only help their process and create a barrier to them returning to incarceration if we do what we can in our limited spaces. Ultimately, it's up to them to assist them in their rehabilitation and being present and accounted for via the ballot box.
Yeah. So we could probably sit and talk about this and have an entire
Yeah.
episode about this one. But what else was in the Voting Rights Act?
The Voting Rights Act also had expanding Native American voting rights. I have a hard time understanding anybody who would be opposed to even, think about the indigenous folks of our state. And very much from the perspective, anytime we should go above and beyond to restore any sense of connection and power
Absolutely.
that we can to those communities. And so it changed kind of the way the precincts were broken down. It talked about the community centers being able to be utilized in a different way. There was really, really cool things that happened. So all of these things totaled, I believe, what MIT looked at and said, well, wait a minute, New Mexico is making some strides. We're getting better and better. And so we're going to go ahead and do our ranking. And sure enough, we were ranked number one. And it talks about things like voter turnout.
Some of the indicators.
Which we're not thrilled about. Let's be honest.
Agree.
We'll talk about that first to get that out of the way. You go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to go ahead and point out some of the indicators. And again, these are the indicators that MIT and their election and data lab looked at. One of the indicators, as Amanda just said, was voter turnout. Amanda and I always want voter turnout to be higher than it is, and I think we'll always want that until we see it at 100%. And I think even MIT, when they were putting out this data, we weren't ranked number one in voter turnout. We were ranked number one overall, but voter turnout was was an area that we could have improved.
And in Doña County, that is something we struggle with.
Absolutely.
There's just it's one thing to register people to vote. That's great. We're all like, yay, voter registration. Let's do it. Everybody get on board. That's one of the reasons we have automatic voter registration when you get your driver's license. But voter registration is great. What matters is voter turnout. Are they showing up at the polling locations? Are they actually, utilizing their right to vote? And it's not enough There are some areas of our state, I can think of Los Alamos, it's like 80+%. We're not there. I think we're happy when we're 50+%. So we're doing things like this, talk about our elections on YouTube, use our socials, do outreach, connect with the high schools. We're doing all the things here that we can. We are a state that does not have funding for outreach. We just don't. But it's the fun stuff. It's stuff that we like to do, and any opportunity that we can with the confines of the requirements we have here at work, where we want to get out there for sure.
Yeah. And so the national average for voter turnout was 47.5%. Now, New Mexico's average in the 2020 cycle was 46.6%.
Yeah, so that's not too.
Yeah,
below,
it wasn't too. It was less than 1 percentage point below. And again, Amanda and I always want to see this number go up. So I hope that it does, because we're like we said, we're trying all the things like this podcast to encourage voters to vote.
And I would also say we also look at the average voting wait time at a polling location. That matters to us. It matters to voters, especially if you're running errands and you have a little sliver of time. We are doing pretty good in that, and we get people in generally less than, I think it's 3.8 minutes. So we like it to be, and that's great. If you have to wait less than 5 minutes, like, that thrills me. And I hear that quite a bit when I'm out in the community and they talk about, oh, I didn't have to wait. Now, some people have. Some people wait till voting day, and there are literally lines outside the door. And it's a tradition. They like to do it that way, and that's fine, but they may have to wait longer. I love early voting. Imagine there's states that do not have early voting.
Shocking. I can't imagine that.
Shocking. I know. I first time somebody said to me, oh, they just have one day to vote. I'm like, well, what do you mean one day?
Yeah.
Well, we have one day to vote. It's election day. I'm like, but what about early voting? Well, we don't have early voting.
That blows my mind.
Right, because we have half of our turnout, and even more so in 2020, was early voting. And returned vote by mail. So kind of keep that in mind. It also measures things that, like, people don't really think about. We get absentee or vote by mail, and we have to make sure that they're squared away. And those who are not, those ballots that we get returned that don't meet the requirements of the statute, they're rejected. So we have a lower return rate, rejection rate, as well as we have a return rate of our absentee that is pretty decent as well. So I think those are pretty important.
Absolutely. And we also have a decent return rate for our uniformed and civilians overseas, which is also, I think, really good, because these are folks who are serving their country in some way, whether they're uniformed or they're civilian, like they're working for Department of Defense or something like along those lines. And they're requesting their ballot because they want to participate, even though they are living overseas. And so I think it's important that
it's beautiful. It's
everything
good.
I love it. I agree.
Well, it really speaks to access, I think, right?
Yes.
Access is what we talk about all the time. There's some individuals that try to make the case that you can't have access and security, but I disagree. I believe we can. I believe we do. And I believe the perfect example is how our military and overseas folks vote, and we make sure that they're taken care of. And we are always thrilled to assist them. Tanya, who really manages our vote by mail, is, herself a military family, and is exceptionally passionate about making sure that we take care of our folks that are overseas and want to participate. So,
absolutely.
Keep that in mind.
Yes. Some other things that we want to talk about is really the electoral infrastructure data. And so they also looked at data completeness, and this measures the degree to which states provide information to the EAC. Now, the EAC, you want to talk about EAC? You're part of EAC.
Sure. The Election Advisory Council is the federal government's guiding organization for elections. And they set a lot of standards, and they do a lot of things connected to the systems and the security and providing technical assistance, support, tools, all of these things. They do an excellent job. But they also ask that we fill out after every election information that does a deep dive into our elections. And we are really good about doing that. And so we got a high score on that because we have basically, I think every single county has completed that. Some states don't bother, but we want accurate data to get to the federal government, and that shows by New Mexico having completed it with, I think, 97%. So maybe there's a county or actually we scored 100%. The national average is 97.4. So we're doing pretty good, but so are most states, it seems like. Online registration. I'm
so proud of our county's efforts, along with the state of New Mexico's county's efforts, because we really push the nmvote.org and being able to register online, which I think is really important, because we want people to be able to have as much access as possible. So whether they want to come into our office or they meet a voter registration agent out in the community and they register that way, or they register when they're getting their license, or they go online and do it. I think it's really important that we make registering to vote as easy as possible.
Well, that's why I think it brings up the idea of the different ways. And what we know is the more options you give voters, the more turnout is going to increase. We just know that. That's why early voting is so key. That's why when we have our extended sites, we do Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 7. We know not everybody works a typical 8 to 5 day. Again, that is a measure that we take in order to increase turnout. We have online registration. We have same-day voter registration. So if you're a student who just woke up on election day and your mom calls you and says you need to vote, historically, it would be too late. But currently, you can actually head to your polling location. You have to have information. You have to probably be prepared to wait, right, a little bit. But we will ask for identification, a proof of residence, et cetera, and really kind of have enhanced ID requirements for you to be able to vote. Again, you may have to wait because we have to loop into our system, send it to a Secretary of State's office who confirms your identity and kind of does that. And then, but you're able to vote the same day, which is really, again, access, another option for voters, and something that will increase turnout, right? Especially with young people that we're always like, come on, y'all.
Yeah.
You can do this.
Absolutely.
We're counting on the 65 plus crowd, but we need you. And young people are coming through for us, I think, more and more.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up some really important items. We know that some of the mis or malinformation out there is that registering online is just not secure. And quite frankly, that's just not true. There are many ways to verify your identity that the government uses, whether it's when you're filing your taxes, or you're getting an ID, or you're getting your annual vehicle registration.
Right.
Like, there are many ways that this is done securely. And online registration, voter registration, is one of those things. We verify your identity. You have to provide either your Social Security or your New Mexico driver's license or ID number, which, again, you've already been verified through a government agency. You have to verify, you have to have, a proof of residency. So we have to have your physical address, things like that. So there are many ways in which we are proving that you are who you say you are.
Right.
And
we want to confirm that. Listen, we're more for. We are huge proponents of the process being seamless and safe.
Yes.
We always shoot for both of those, but safety, security is always a priority. I want to add the layer, though, of a signature. When you register to vote, there are many layers you go through that will ask you to affirm, is this you? And any voter or potential voter who is completing that information is affirming under a 4th degree penalty threat, basically, that is them. You do that when you get to an election site as well. When you check in and you sign, you're affirming that is you. Now, I have a hard time believing that there's a whole just basically mob of people that are willing to commit 4th degree felonies for one vote. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It has. Again, Brennan Institute is a great resource for talking about voter fraud, because it does talk about it, and it does say the states where it has, and there has been cases in New Mexico. And know that our office believes for sure, and to the extent of the law that we are able to, is to pursue charges against anyone who specifically with intent would do that, which we hope that they don't.
We hope they don't, but just so that you all know, like, our office has provided information to the DA's office when those things happen.
So again, with statute, we talk about statute all the time. I always joke, like, the best thing about my job and the worst thing about my job is everything is driven by statute and law. And there's not a lot of gray area in that. Sometimes there is, but we work through that with our legal. But I will say, like, that is something that I am pretty unrelenting on, is turning over information we have that are suspicious to the district attorney's office, and by statute, they are the authority that investigates and pursues anything connected to that. So our job is to turn it over. Their job is to investigate, and we always do that when we have information that
absolutely
may just need to be looked into.
And again, I think you're right. I think not just the signature where they're verifying, and again, against the perjury or 4th-degree felony.
Right.
But also, we've talked about that signature and how it's one of the gold standards for proof of identification.
Right. And so to be clear, New Mexico currently does have require a signature. We do a signature verification, which is different than a signature comparison. We hope to get there at some point where we compare signatures, and there's a lot of technology that's available to assist with that. But I always say, like, there's only a problem if there's a problem.
Yep.
If we get a report that there's something up, of course we're going to go look at the signatures. We've had times when signatures have been drastically different. What do we find out? Maybe somebody had a stroke. Their signature is different. They have aged and they have not signed something from our office or the DMV or whatever for 10 years, and their signature has changed for sometimes a medical condition. I mean, sometimes people just want to change their signature. There's a lot of reasons, but we always need to find out the why, and we do that. So signature confirmation or verification, and we'll get to signature comparison.
Someday we're going to get there.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yep.
Go New Mexico, go.
Okay, I will also want to go ahead and touch on our post-election audits.
Sure.
Which we call Canvas.
Well, right, the Canvas happens right after an election, and that is basically where we go through every single one of our election voting sites. And there are 52 when you look at all of our early voting sites and our election day sites. So we have, I believe it's 52. So what we do at that point is literally there's a team of people at each of those sites that turn in a whole host of documentation that supports everything that happens at a voting location. And we basically do a deep dive. A team does a deep dive into those and confirms that everything is accurate, that everything is accounted for. And I'm telling you, we have spent sometimes 3 or 4 hours looking for one piece of paper. And I'm not exaggerating. We have spent time, I think 86,000 votes we had to count 4 times by hand because we were looking for one thing in particular. That is the level of detail that New Mexico elections goes through, not just in our county, but statewide. And that is one of the reasons that we are ranked 1, is because those details matter. They matter to voters. They matter to us. Luckily, we have a team here that it matters to them. They want everything to be correct. And I always say, like, elections aren't perfect, and that's hard for me because I'm a frustrated perfectionist. But we do our best every time to tighten up, get better and better. And I think we're doing a great job on that.
And I think, with our audits, our Canvas, we recount these elections sometimes 5, 6, 7 times.
Well, it's funny because I love the fact that you're relatively new. You'll be here 2 years this coming fall. And I like to get the perspective. I feel like I'm old now at this, although I've only been at it, I think, 5.5 years. I've learned a lot, but there's always a lot to learn. And so people say, like, oh, you're an election expert. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, I run elections, I administer elections, and I've learned everything I can as often as I can, and really kind of take it in. But things do change, just like they did last year, right? Law has changed. And but always, with the goal to get good information. So the Canvas happens afterwards, and then basically I kind of use Canvas and audit interchangeably because they basically kind of mean the same thing. But the audit specific to statute then starts. We send everything to our Secretary of State's office. They do a deep dive. They ask us for things. They have questions about things. We have to answer them. And then the audits start after that with basically randomly selected. They select precincts at random to verify each site. So we have 190 precincts. So if we pick 10 out of those, pull every single one of those precincts, and everything has to be perfect. We don't know what precincts they're going to be, right? So we're happy, but not surprised when they turn out to be accurate and true, because that's the work we do on the front end.
Yeah, and I'd also, while we're still talking about our audits and our Canvas, again, some of the mis and malinformation out there is that for some reason people say that we don't do audits and that we don't Canvas. And it blows my mind.
Who are these people?
I know who they are.
I could name them, but no.
We could name. We're not going to, but we could. Because quite frankly, what's so impressive about New Mexico, and not all states do this, obviously. Not all states do this, but we canvass at the county level, and then it gets counted again at the state level. Not all states do that.
Yeah.
To make sure. Cool. Yeah, we are. We're pretty great at that. And so when I hear people putting out this mis and malinformation, they just don't know, or they know and they're just putting out bad information.
New Mexico is also a member of ERIC. ERIC is the electronic registration, basically entity that more states participated in it at one point. I believe there's 27 now that participate in it. I'm not quite sure. We up to 34, I believe, and then I think 6 left, but that could have changed yesterday. Who knows? What I will say is ERIC is an entity that lets us know when somebody from New Mexico has registered in another state. They add them to the list. We get a list, and then we make sure that we remove them from our voter roll. And it just helps the integrity of our voter roll and to make sure that those folks are not listed as eligible active voters anymore. And so that's something that's kind of a very collaborative thing that we do nationally with states. It would be great if all of them participated in it, but we're happy to be, definitely a proponent of ERIC as well as participated. And we do have at ERIC times when we pull those voters and remove them from our voter roll based on the information that ERIC gives us, which is helpful.
And there really has to be an event for ERIC to kind of get activated, whether it's like if they move to another state and they go and get their new driver's license.
Right, that's it. Right, that's exactly it. So it's like a communication between states like, hey, this person moved here to our state now, so just FYI. And so we take that information and do what we need to do with that. And I will say, at the end of the day, I'm just proud, New Mexico scored an 88% on the election performance index, making us number 1 in the nation. That is something that I want us to talk about again and again. I probably will again and again between now and the next ranking that comes out, which is 2 years, which is a lot of years for me to be talking about it. But we are exceptionally proud of our ranking.
And I think, I know Amanda's super excited. You've been talking about the election and data lab and these rankings for a long time. And so I know that you were super, super excited when we were ranked number 1. And if you look at in 2014, we were ranked number 38 in the nation.
And I've got to give credit to our secretaries of state.
Yes.
Because a lot of the reason that we have moved up is legislation that is pro-voter, pro-security.
Yes.
And our Secretary of State, Secretary Toulouse Oliver, has championed this for many, many years, back to when she was the clerk in Bernalillo County. So I think this work has come to fruition, and we just hope that we can head everybody off and continue to stay number 1. That would be great.
Yep.
So this is really a decade's worth of fighting, battling, and getting some legislation in that is pro-voter, pro-New Mexican, and everything good, that I can think of. So connected to the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess that's it for
this
episode today.
That's a lot of information.
That was a lot of information.
I know. I mean, I come to the podcast and do them when I can help, and then I feel like I kind of like go on and on. But this one particularly,
you're excited
one has
about
my
this
heart,
one.
and you knew.
Yeah.
And so much so that our Secretary of State called me when she received the notification that we were number 1, because she knows is something that I promote consistently and constantly every time I present. So to be able to go to groups and say, hey, we were 9, then we're 24, but then now to be able to say we're number 1 is pretty exciting for us. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please continue to tune in, subscribe, also listen to our podcasts. They're available all over, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Head to our website, dacelections.com. We have a lot of great information about upcoming elections. If you're interested in working elections, there's also a nice little tab that you click on and gives you all the information. And my name is Amanda López Askin. This is my Chief Deputy, Caroline Zamora. We appreciate you joining us, and we hope you do it again. Have a great, great day.